I am live. I am. Okay. Are you sure? Okay. Regardless of what I'm seeing on the screen, I want to welcome everybody to our Bible study this morning. As I said earlier, because last week I was just sitting here messing with my phone. So I want to let everybody know that I am trying to share a link with somebody that wants to watch our Bible study. So just bear with me here. Okay. Okay, I'll turn that down. It's a little bit easier today. Share, copy link. Okay, let me go ahead and X that out. Paste. Okay, hopefully he gets it. Okay, we've been in the Gospel of John a number of, I, I guess, months now. I wish I would have wrote it down. But what we've been doing is we've been going verse by verse through the whole Gospel of John. Welcome, come on in, guys. And we've been studying, we've been discussing, we've been conversing over the Gospel of John, and it's been a wonderful study. But one thing that I have neglected to share with you about the Gospel of John is the theme verse of the whole Gospel. Now, I think we've went there a couple of times, but I don't think that I actually pointed out, hey, if you want to put a theme to the whole Gospel of John, you can find it in John chapter 20. So if you want to mark it, if you want to write it down, it's John chapter 20 and verse 31. Actually, let me start in verse 30. 30 and 31. It says, "And truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book." So we notice that John has done a lot of things that just weren't recorded in the book. "But these are written that you may believe," this is verse 31 here, the theme verse, "but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name." That is the theme verse of the Gospel of John. Says, "But these are written that you may believe." So everything that we have been reading from John chapter 1 up to John, the latter part of John chapter 8, are things that were written that we may believe. So we're seeing a lot of miracles in the Gospel of John, aren't we? We're seeing quite a few. This happened to me once before. So we've seen a lot of miracles happening in the Gospel of John. So here we are in the latter stages of John chapter 8. And what we see here is Jesus has been in Jerusalem at the Feast of the Tabernacles. The Feast of the Tabernacles was it was a celebration. It was a memorial to the time that they were in the wilderness for 40 years, and they were living in tents. They were living in booths. So it's the Feast of Booths, the Feast of Tents. And they built these tents up. And Jesus appeared at the Feast of Tabernacles, and he's been going through many discussions, and he's been very outspoken toward the people that have come up, and most of them are persecuting him. So now he's talking to a group of Pharisees, and, let me go back to last week. He was talking to these Pharisees, and one thing that he said to them, "You are of your father the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him." So that's basically the conversation that Jesus is having with these Pharisees. They think they're very legalistic, right? The Old Testament law was polluted by these folks. And we've mentioned the way that they polluted the command not to wasn't by their law, wasn't allowed to look into a mirror or to stoop down and pick something up off the ground. So these guys are very legalistic. And we've seen this a few chapters back when Jesus healed the lame man who had been lame for 38 years. He did it on the Sabbath. And I think that was back in John chapter 5 or 6. But what happened after that was, from that point forward, we're moving on downward in the ministry of Jesus, as far as them wanting to kill him. So now we're here in John chapter 8. And just to let you guys know that the Gospel of John, at this point, there's only a few months left in the ministry of Jesus on earth. Even though we have 21 chapters, we're only a few months left in the ministry of Jesus on earth. We are in about the fall of the year, around the time of the Feast of Tabernacles. So let's say September, October. Well, by April, he's going to be dead. They're going to crucify him. So now he is very outspoken. I'm not going to say confrontational. They appear to be more confrontational. But Jesus is trying to plead with them and tell them the truth. And when they don't hear, he tells them like it is, right? Last week we left off in verse 47. Let me reread verse 47 or 46. Which of you convicts me of sin? And if I tell the truth, why do you not believe me? So Jesus has been trying to tell them the truth the whole time that he has been with them. In fact, later on, whenever we come to John chapter 14, we see that Jesus is the truth, the way, the truth, and the life. He who is of God hears God's words. Therefore, you do not hear because you are not of God. Now, these folks, and Jesus is correct, this is Jesus speaking. He's telling them they are not of God. And so, what are they? They are well read in the law, correct? How could you read the Old Testament law, the Old Testament, and not see what is about to happen with Jesus or who Jesus is? He's done many things to prove this. And earlier on, he gave 5 discourses about how he was equal with God in all ways. There is no difference between God and Jesus. Now, we don't understand this as human beings. Our finite minds don't understand how there's 3 entities, but it's only one person. Then the Jews answered and said to him, do we not say rightly that you are a Samaritan and have a demon? I'm trying to give you an idea of what they're saying to him. Miss Vicki, you're a Floridian, right? Floridian, you've been in Florida not your whole life. Okay. Now, you go to the beach a lot, right? Now, I know you wouldn't get upset, but what if someone came up to you and said, you're a tourist? She laughed. Okay. Well, that's what they're doing to Jesus here. They're saying, Jesus, you're a Samaritan and you have a demon. Samaria, they were in the northern part of Israel. They had a lot of people that had Greek blood, Roman blood. They were a mixed people, and at that time, unfortunately, people like that, and they also built their own altar. Instead of going down to Jerusalem, they built their own altar to God where they were at. So it wasn't very polite to call someone a Samaritan in that day and age. Okay, and they also said, you have a demon. Okay, I want to make sure I can see my clock. Last week we went way over. So they said that Jesus, can you imagine telling the Son of God that he has a demon? More than that, the second person in the Godhead, you have a demon. Jesus cast out demons, but he wasn't a demon. Jesus answered, I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. And I do not seek my own glory. There is one who seeks and judges. Most assuredly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he shall never see death. So here Jesus is claiming that he has the authority. If anyone seeks his word, seeks him, shall never see death. Jesus is absolutely offering salvation to anyone that seeks after him. There's a scripture in the New Testament we may have to talk about in the book of Romans, but we might not get to it today. Then the Jews said to him, now we know that you have a demon. Abraham is dead, and the prophets, and you say, if anyone keeps my word, we shall never taste death. Let me back up here in verse 52. He's talking about Abraham. Remember, way back in the Old Testament, whenever Abraham went to free his nephew Lot from, he was held captive by the 5 kings, or one of the 5 kings, and on the way back from the battle, Abraham met a man named Melchizedek, and we may talk about him in a second. So just to give you a heads up, Melchizedek may be a Christophany, an Old Testament appearance of Jesus Christ. Abraham himself, Abraham himself is the father of the nation of Israel. Abraham, in that particular setting back then and throughout his life, was a representation of the whole nation of Israel. So we're going to see how Jesus talks to these folks like, your father Abraham rejoiced. He looked forward. He invited me in, and remember, he did. The appearance of God to the tent whenever God said that Sarah was going to have a baby. So, are you greater than our father? Verse 53. Abraham, who is dead, and the prophets are dead, who do you make yourself out to be? That's a good question. Who is Jesus making himself out to be here? We've seen earlier he was very plain in what he said a few chapters back, where he was equal with God. So they're still wondering. They're in unbelief, total unbelief. If not, they have hardened hearts. Jesus answered, I honor my Father. My honor is nothing. It is my Father who honors me, of whom you say that he is your God. Yet you have not known him, but I know him. And if I say I do not know him, I shall be a liar like you. So Jesus is calling them straightforward, straight up. If I would say I didn't know God, I would be a liar just like you. Okay. But I know him and keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. Let's talk about this. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day. Do we know when this was? There's no clarification, to be honest with you. But whenever I was talking about Abraham that went out and met Melchizedek, Abraham paid tithes of all that he had to Melchizedek. Melchizedek's name also means king of righteousness. He was the king of Salem, which, in other words, he was the king of Jerusalem, the king of peace. If that's not an Old Testament Christophany, I don't know what is. But there are some people that believe other things. I seem to believe that It was an appearance of Jesus. Some people think that it might have been a son of Noah who was still alive at the time, Shem. Okay. Then the Jews said to him, "You are not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham?" Okay, that's an easy answer there. I don't think Jesus is going to say, "Yeah, I have." Yeah. But anyways, we know that Jesus had seen Abraham, but he's not yet 50 years old, right? Now, this means, did Jesus look older than what he was? He was only about 32 or 33 years old here at this point. And they're saying, "You're not yet 50," which is true. He's not yet 50. But did he even look 40? In those days, he might have had a different aging way whenever you age. They're dry skin, they didn't have lotion to put on and stuff like that. But they're saying, "You're not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham?" Jesus said to them, "Most assuredly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am." The word is ego eimi, I am. In the Old Testament Septuagint, whenever God said that I am who I am, it was ego eimi in the Septuagint. Of course, we know that it was originally written in Hebrew, but when translated from Hebrew to Greek in the Septuagint, it was the same words that we see here. Like we've talked before, a lot of non-Christians today, maybe even some Christians, may say that Jesus never claimed to be God in the Scriptures. Like we talked about last week, I tend to disagree with that, because we see right here, and we'll have proof of it in a few verses, because of the reaction that these Pharisees have toward what he says. Okay. Then they took up stones to throw at him. Here we go. Why would they take up stones to throw at him if he did not claim to be God? They were going to kill him right there on the spot, because he said, "Before Abraham was, I am." Blasphemy, yes. Yes. So, yes, they thought Jesus was committing blasphemy. He's claiming here, "I am God. I am from everlasting to everlasting. I'm the beginning and the end." And they see it plain and simple. They took up stones. So whenever somebody tells you, "Oh, the Bible never claims that Jesus said that he was God," that's just not true. You just have to read into it, pray first, and read, and you can see it right there. Okay. This happens every week. I lose my spot. Oh, we are, yes. Yes. Let me look at the clock. It's 10:17, so we're going to just finish chapter 8 today. So the last verse in, chapter 8. The last verse in chapter 8 is verse 59. Then they took up stones to throw at him, and Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them, so passed by. That he what? Yes. Yes. Not only, he was in the women's court. The women's court. I think, what was the other word? Treasury. But he was in the women's court. And that's, since we're at the end, I can do this. There was a lot of oil. They had just finished the Feast of Tabernacles, celebrating the wilderness wanderings for 40 years. And in the women's court, the treasury, there was a lot of oil pots where they would light lights up. So whenever Jesus said earlier in the chapter, I am the light of the world, he was looking at those lights that were surrounding them. So that's a good thing. Usually Jesus uses things around him to teach an idea. So it's a sin. And it's against their law. It just baffles me too, that to know that they are teachers of the law, that they are so legalistic that they will, if one of their oral traditions, laws about the Sabbath is you wasn't allowed to pluck a gray hair out of your head. That's how legalistic they were. And now they're going to pick up stones to stone this fella, where he's done a lot of miracles. They've seen them. And in chapter 9, he's about to do another one on the Sabbath again. And they just don't believe what he is saying. Now, we do know that at least one of the Pharisees does believe, which takes us all the way back to John chapter 3, Nicodemus. So Nicodemus, it doesn't say that Nicodemus is here during this. So there was hundreds, if not thousands, of Pharisees in and around Jerusalem, in and around the temple in Jerusalem. But remember the theme, that these things are written that we may believe. That we may believe. John chapter 20, verse 31. We're not there yet, but it's good to know that as we study through the whole Gospel of John. So, also, it was against the law not only for them to do it by their law, but before there was any kind of capital punishment, they had to go through the Roman government. Remember, the Romans are the ones that are in charge in Jerusalem. So that not only would they be in trouble by their own people, well, no, they probably wouldn't be in trouble by them. They would definitely be in trouble by Pilate. So yeah, exactly. They were so mad. Remember with later on, they went through the whole thing where they went through the courts. They finally got to see Pilate. What did Pilate say? I see no fault in this man. I'm washing my hands of this. No, that's a miracle in itself. I don't know how it happened. It says he just walked. Maybe he turned invisible. I don't know. It doesn't tell us. He went, yeah, he must have.
Since he's the light of the world, he doused that part of the light to go away.
Exactly. That's a possible. Maybe he, that God is spirit. He just might have turned into spirit and went through the midst of them. That's some good ideas there, but that's some heavy stuff. I like where Jesus said, "Before Abraham was, I am." And by the way, if you want to learn more about the Melchizedek experience, it's in Genesis chapter, I think, 14. And then if you go to Hebrews chapter 7, you can read more about it. Okay, let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you, Father, for these scriptures. We thank you for the Gospel of John. We finished John chapter 8.